Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Eddie Casillas, and this is my Honors 105 presentation on the creative work of mind. So, the creative piece of mind that I chose to uncover, analyze, and share with others is the musical piece Rocket Man by Elton John. In the early 1970s, Elton John had made a name for himself for his genius work, which fused pop and rock. But later in his life in the 1990s, Elton John had created the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which was his way of fighting stigma against the gay community. Elton John had become one of the most popular musical icons of the 20th century, not only for his progressive movements but for his masterpieces released in the 1970s. And it was in 1972 that Rocket Man sent him to the top of the charts and cemented his place as an icon. I believe that Rocket Man is a creative work of mine that could be considered a masterpiece and is the greatest example of how influential Elton John was, not only to pop and rock, but to the entire culture of piano music through his use of dress, lyrics, and musical composure. John's fame came from his outrageous form of dress and appearances in his live performances. His appearance showcased how exactly he was to change the musical forms of piano. In his own words, John said, I wasn't a sex symbol like David Bowie, Mark Bolan, or Freddie Mercury, so I dressed more on the humorous side, because if I was going to be stuck at the piano for 2 hours, I was going to make people look at me. He was eccentric. He was catchy and emotional. These were the products that formed what we now call modern piano music. Most stereotypical pianists are seen as classical and, for lack of a better word, fancy. However, this was the first step that John took to change the image of the pianists, and it was through his style of dress. The next step was through his lyrics and emotional conveyance. Now, John had admitted that he was never gifted in writing lyrics. For example, most of his musical work, and even Rocket Man, was not written by Elton John, but by Bernie Taupin. Rocket Man itself was based on a short story from the book The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. It was meant to show the point of view of an average futuristic worker whose life had passed him by because he was too busy spending his life working to be with his family. And he recounts his desiderate wife and children. And though this is only one example, John's musical style is very consistently emotional and currently relevant and relatable. His emotional structure does not only rely on his musical composition like the piano music of old, but it is heavily supported by his jarring lyrics. And the final step for the evolution of the piano composure in John's work was his actual piano composure, was his actual written pieces. The era of classical music essentially started with the invention of the piano in the early 1700s. The most important contributions to the classical genre would invent the invention of the harpsichord, which has even dated back to the 15th century, and the clavichord in the 18th century. So, when listening to different classical pieces by most influential composers, Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, etc., it's obvious that there are rarely ever lyrics accompanying the pieces. The most emotion was conveyed through the chords of the instrument. Each note was a different word that gave emotional feeling, which structured the overall tone of the piece. And the most fascinating part of this has to do with Elton John, though. For as his music evolved and as his lyrics had been adjoined, John kept those emotional words in his music. In an analysis of his live performances, Rocket Man alone, his performances of Rocket Man alone, a listener can hear that each performance is a little different. While the major chords follow the written structure of the song, John improvises abridged notes that give extra feeling to the music because it is constantly evolving and can be played by anyone. There's no necessarily correct way of playing the song because John plays it different every time. And it's for these reasons that Rocket Man is the creative work of mine that had a deep influence on piano music, and I feel it deserves to be recognized. Elton John serves as an example of an artist that changed the platform that he stood on. His writings show the intense passion that few talented musicians convey, from his actual musical skills to his flamboyant, attention-grabbing appearances. Elton John's influence on pop and rock music has shown that the musical evolution is inevitable. While it is far from the only example, Rocket Man, in and of itself, is a classic piece of music that forced the evolution of a genre with an instrument that has stood for hundreds of years. These are my resources. If you would like to discuss them with me, my email is listed there. They are all listed in the UNLV libraries and in the UNLV music libraries. Please feel free to discuss them with me. And I've been Eddie Casillas, and thank you for listening.